Welcome to the second episode of The Decline and Fall of the Kings of Israel. Before we get started, I'm going to review some news that you might have missed. And this comes from the Barna group. It's about pornography. And I'm going to present some data with not a lot of commentary on the morality involved, except to say that pornography does delegitimize the biblically designed sexual intercourse. And I've seen marriages come to an end because of it. It's also been associated with violence. Ted Bundy, who was a mass murderer, confessed to James Dobson before he was put to death that he was heavily into pornography and blamed some of his actions on that obsession. What's concerning is there's a cavalier attitude today that extends even to teenagers, and 32% saying that viewing porn is usually or always wrong, but 56% of recycling. That is, recycling is viewed to be more important than pornography. More than half of women 25 and under seek out porn, and a third seek it out monthly. So this challenges a common assumption that it's a male problem. Well, who uses pornography? Well, across the board, uh, the baby boomers are less than half of those who get involved in pornography. A proposed name change that some people have suggested for the boomers is called the Viagras. Well, very few people who use pornography report feeling much guilt about it, except the teens, practicing Christians, and the political conservatives, and some pastors. Shame does very little but drive the sin into hiding. 57% of pastors and 64% of youth pastors admit to struggling with pornography usage at some point. And 93% of pastors have no program in their church to help those who are struggling. In our area, Celebrate Recovery is a very effective program that I know has helped some people with pornography. So we're going to talk today about the dividing of the kingdom and King Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Notice the photograph that I've included here. God has rules for kings. In Deuteronomy 17, he enumerated things, and I think there's an importance to the numerical order. First thing is no foreigners, and then not too many horses, and we talked about that last week. And that you should not cause people to return to Egypt, and then don't have too many wives, and no excessive silver or gold. And the king is to write this down and keep it with him and read it regularly. Now, how serious was God about these rules? Well, we saw God's anger in 1 Kings. He was angry with Solomon. And remember, he appeared to Solomon twice because Solomon's heart had turned away from the Lord. And he didn't keep what God had commanded. And so he said he's going to tear the kingdom away from him. And he would do it in his lifetime for the sake of David, but he would be left with only 2 tribes, and the kingdom would be divided. And so the Lord did raise up adversaries against Solomon, and Solomon is circling the drain. First was Hadad the Edomite, and remember, Edom is to the south of Israel, and it's where the descendants of Esau live, the elder son of Isaac and the twin brother of Jacob. It's most of the enemies of Israel really came like the waves of the sea, each different and each potentially destructive. But Edom was like the wind. It was just always there, and it was always an adversary. And when the news that David had died, uh, Hadad wanted to return home. He became a thorn in the side of Solomon. And the Lord raised up Rezon of Damascus, and these were the Arameans, and they remained a thorn in the side of Israel for 2 centuries. Then in 1 Kings 11:26, it talks about Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite from Zeradah, a servant of Solomon, also lifted up his hand against the king. He was an Ephraimite, and Ephraim was just above Benjamin, sort of central in all the 12 tribes. And Solomon had found that Jeroboam was a very able and industrious man, and gave him charge over all the forced labor in the house of Joseph. That's in Ephraim and Manasseh. So Jeroboam knew Solomon more than the average person. Well, he was going along the road one day and he met Ahijah the prophet. And Ahijah the prophet in 1 Kings 11:29 gives him this reading that you have here. I'm not going to read the whole thing because you can read it yourself, but the important part is that Ahijah gave to Jeroboam a robe that he tore into 12 pieces and showed that 10 of them would belong to the north and to the new kingdom, and 2 of them would be in the south, in the old kingdom. And he did add to this that if you will listen to all I command you and will walk in my ways and do what is right in my eyes, then I will be with you and build you a sure house. Now, God is patient. He promises that Jeroboam can have good things if he listens and obeys. Let's see what happens, though. Before we leave that, Ahijah was a Shilonite, and a Shilonite was a descendant of Shelah, Judah's youngest son. This man has been made a saint in the Eastern Orthodox Church, and he's memorialized on November 12th every year. His name, Ah, means brother, and Jah is an abbreviated form of Yahweh. So it can be put together as brother or ally of the Lord. Remember that Elijah, El means God, with perhaps a little g, and Jah is God with a big G, so God is God. Ahijah promises are given directly to Solomon. These promises had been given to Solomon, excuse me, and he's repeating these, that the kingdom will be divided, but Solomon would rule all his life. Now in verse 40 it says, Solomon therefore sought to kill Jeroboam. And it's not clear why Solomon attempted to kill him, because maybe he was a threat to the throne, or Jeroboam had become a rebel, or Solomon was trying to put off the inevitable. But surely as a wise man, he must have known that he couldn't thwart the edict of God. Well, Jeroboam fled to Egypt and made friends with Shishak, the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh. And this is the first time an actual Pharaoh is named. Also remember that in the rules for kings, they weren't supposed to cause people to go to Egypt. Well, Solomon reigned for 40 years, and then he was buried in the city of David. He died at the age of 60, and that would be around 932 BC. When he dies, his son Rehoboam was 41 years old. Now, I was kind of surprised to find that, because some of the actions he takes make you think of a younger man, a foolish young man. Now, contrast Solomon for a moment with David. David remained faithful to God till the last. He made mistakes. But more is said about David's death than about Solomon's. So David was a crackpot. He was filled with potential and grace. He leaked, but he was never really empty. Solomon was more of a broken pot. In 11:4-5, it says Solomon worshipped the idols of his wives. In 11:6, it says, so Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and did not wholly follow the Lord. And so Solomon was ultimately discarded. Solomon disappears from the scripture in a stereotypical epitaph. It says in 11:41, now the rest of the acts of Solomon and all that he did and his wisdom, are they not written in the book of the acts of Solomon? It's kind of cold. That's the way a lot of these subsequent kings are going to be treated, the ones that just really don't do well. In 1143, it said Rehoboam, his son, reigned in his place. Now, I don't see that he was anointed. I don't see anything about priests or prophets or anything like that. He just reigned in Solomon's place. Now, how do we remember Jeroboam, Rehoboam? The names sound very similar. I'll tell you the way I do it. It's not rocket science. But Jeroboam jump-started a new kingdom. There was no kingdom in the north. He jump-started it. And he was well, his name meant made the people be great. And he was a son of a widow. Now, some speculate that he himself was actually wealthy. But he was a man in the street, so to speak. He worked in construction. He was an overseer of labor, forced labor, but it was labor. So in a way, he was a Jew's Jew, and another use of the letter J. But not that he was pious, but he was just common, like everyone else in the kingdom. They could relate to him. Now, incidentally, as an aside, today, a Jeroboam is a bottle of wine that's 6 times the standard size. A standard size is 3/4 of a liter. A magnum is double that, or 1.5 liters. And a double magnum is a Jeroboam. And these sizes keep on increasing, as I've shown you here in this slide, and they even go further up to the Solomon, which is 18 liters, and a Melchizedek, which is 30. Interesting. Rehoboam was really a rotten and resistant kind of guy. He used forced labor, as did King Solomon, and he lived a life that was removed from the common man in a redolent palace of splendor. Rehoboam means enlarges the people. He was a bully, but I'm getting ahead of the story. And before I leave this slide, notice Shechem, which is in the center here. Well, I can't seem to show it. There it is, Shechem. It's a center. It was a city of refuge for a manslayer or murderer. In 12:1, Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. Well, why not Jerusalem? That's where the temple was. Hadn't David and Solomon made it a center of the kingdom, a royal city? Well, Shechem had a great history, and it was between Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. And in Deuteronomy 11:29, God commands, it says, "And when the Lord your God brings you out of the land that you are entering to take possession of it, you shall set the blessings on Mount Gerizim and the curse on Mount Ebal." And Joshua then assembled the people, and they stood on Mount Gerizim, and they would yell back over to hear the blessings, and they would yell the curses back and forth. And these are natural amphitheaters here, so they could hear each other on either side. And then they buried the bones of Joseph there. They brought the bone out of Egypt, and this is where they buried them. And then later, it was at Shechem that the people made Abimelech the first king. He ruled for 3 years, and then God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the leaders of Shechem. And in the end, the people of Shechem were gathered in a tower, and Abimelech collected wood to put around the tower and burn them out. And as he prepared to set fire, a woman dropped a millstone on his head. He collapsed, and he didn't want people to think that he was killed by a woman. So in his last breaths, he told his armor bearer to kill him. The original Israel was a confederation of tribes, and early in David's reign, only Judah followed him. The other tribes wanted to follow one of Saul's descendants, someone from the tribe of Benjamin, as was Saul. Well, it took David 7 years before the people finally agreed to accept him as the king. Solomon then took over quickly. He was David's son and secured tribal allegiances. And that reign brought about power and prosperity to the people, but there was a cost, and that's taxes and loss of personal freedom because people were impressed into forced labor. Some people have said that he didn't require as much from the tribe of Judah, and of course that would be a very polarizing sort of thing. But people also did see his idolatry. Now Rehoboam comes along. He's inheriting a rather fragile kingdom, and there are going to be questions about who ought to reign. And so Shechem was in the heart of all the tribes. It was basically the center of mass of the nation. And that's why one of the reasons why he went there, he wanted to gauge their loyalty and assert his right to rule. It was a statement that he was making by going there. And all the tribes appeared for the ceremony. They'd come with the intent of crowning Rehoboam, but they weren't without conditions. God had warned them long before Rehoboam, Solomon and David, though. Way before these kings, Samuel the prophet had prophesied about kings and told the people to be wary. And this summarizes some of the things that he was concerned about. That he'll take your sons, he'll appoint for himself commanders, he'll take your daughters, he'll take the best of your field, he'll take a tenth of your grain in your vineyards, and the best of your young men and your donkeys. I find it funny that those two are put in juxtaposition. And he'll take a tenth of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And you will cry out because you're king, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. Very sobering. Well, essentially, this is what happened under Solomon. He didn't consider returning to being a theocracy, and now they wanted a new, but a human king, and they wanted a more lenient king. Like that would be honored, and it would solve their problems. And so they ignored Samuel's warning. Well, in 1 Kings 12, 2-3, it says, and as soon as Jeroboam the son of Nebat heard of it, for he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon, then Jeroboam returned from Egypt, and he sent and called for him. And Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and said to Rehoboam, your father made our yoke heavy. Therefore, lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke on us, and we will serve you. Now, remember, this is important, that this was an agricultural nation and had been bled for the temple and for the fortifications and the palace of Solomon. And the people wanted to live their simple lives, being protected by a king, but not bled by the king. Their interests were economic. Remove the heavy yoke. It wasn't a spiritual thing they were complaining about. Well, King Rehoboam had to think about it. Remember, he was 41 years old. And so in verse 6, it says, he took the counsel of the old men and said, if you will be a servant to the people. Well, the previous great leaders had been servants like Moses and Joshua and Samuel and David. But he abandoned their counsel in verse 8. Notice that he doesn't pray about it or seek spiritual counsel. So in 9, he seeks the counsel of the young men who'd grown up with him. Now, these young men are in their 40s. And they'd grown up in the lap of luxury, and they wanted more luxury, and they knew no mercy. They wanted to protect themselves, and they must have sensed that if Rehoboam gave an inch, the people would demand more. The lesson here is to decide beforehand the value of the advisor when you seek advice. The credentials of the advisor may be more important than the advice given. I appreciated when one of my friends was faced with a challenge. He sought counsel from a Paul, a Barnabas, and a Timothy. Paul being the old guy, me, Barnabas being the young guy, and Timothy the middle-aged guy. All were Christians, and he listened. Well, Rehoboam didn't ask the priests or even a prophet of God, nor did he pray. In 14, he said, my father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. Well, in those days, a scorpion was a whip that had bone chips in it, so it could really tear the skin off. So the king did not listen to the people, for it was a turn of affairs brought about by the Lord, that he might fulfill his word, which the Lord spoke to Ahijah the Shilonite, to Jeroboam the son of Nebat. How often can our problems be described in 3 words? Did not listen. It reminds me of advice my father gave me when I was in school. He said, when you have 3 minutes to work a problem, spend 2 minutes reading it, a majority of the effort. Likewise, if you're faced with a people problem, spend 2 minutes listening, and then a minute solving the problem. So in 15, the king did not listen. He heard, but he didn't listen. The kingdom was ready to split. God did not split it. The people did. God had his prophet foretell of these events. And once God says something will happen, it will happen. You know, for me, my interpretation is that life is littered with decisions. And of course, when decisions cease, so do we. But F.W. Boam says it really well. He says, we make our decisions, and then our decisions turn around and make us. The decision to divide the kingdom will be Rehoboam's and Israel's undoing. The northern tribe said, what portion do we have in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Now look at your own house, David. So they went to their tents. Well, that's saying, let's get out of here. And as tribal people, they returned to their tents, to their tribes. They were no longer a nation. Rehoboam fled to Jerusalem. He was no longer safe in Shechem. And Judah was alone. The northern tribes then made Jeroboam their king. He jump-started the kingdom. But Rehoboam reigned over the people of Israel who lived in the cities of Judah. And then King Rehoboam said Adoram he was a taskmaster of forced labor, and all Israel stoned him to death with stones. So Israel's been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. I hope you're not too offended by this picture. I thought it important to show stoning because it is brutal. It's horrible. And in this case, it's murder. Rehoboam didn't get it. He seemed to think that he could repair the damage by sending a hated emissary to negotiate, and Adoram paid with his life. It was anger, it was hate, and it was murder, and it wasn't justified. He was only a servant to the king. I could have picked a different picture. You can find these on the internet. They are gruesome. And what I did learn, to my surprise, is that in the Middle East, it seems to be common that they bury a person up to their waist in the dirt so they can't run and they can't duck, and then they stone them. Well, this was not a propitious start for the northern kingdom, but it did suggest their fate. If you live by the stone, you will die by the stone. And when all Israel heard that Jeroboam had returned, they sent and called for him to the assembly and made him king over all Israel. There was none that followed the house of David, but the tribe of Judah only. Notice there's no mention of anointing, no prophet, no priest. The kingdom begins with murder and turning their back on God. Even though Ahijah was a man of God and he prophesied to Jeroboam that God would give him the throne and put in ifs and thens, rewards for following God. Isn't that though like us? God gives us gifts and we fail to listen. We fail to thank him. We fail to honor him. You have to ask, will we end badly too? Well, when Rehoboam came to Jerusalem, he assembled all the house of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin, 180,000 chosen warriors to fight against the house of Israel, to restore the kingdom of Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. What do kings do when they feel slighted or threatened? They declare war. Who pays for the war? The people do. But these people were a family of God. And in Psalm 133:1, it says, behold, how good and how pleasant it is for the brethren to dwell together in unity. They certainly weren't dwelling together in unity now. Well, we have so far glossed over an apparent contradiction. In verse 20, it said Rehoboam ruled over only Judah. And then in 21, he assembled a force from Judah and Benjamin. Well, notice that Benjamin is sort of sandwiched between Ephraim and Judah. It's a small sliver of land. And it was the tribe of Benjamin. It's also the tribe that surrounds Jerusalem. And they were harassed by the Philistines until the time of David. And then they began to be scattered among the surrounding tribes. And they were sort of absorbed by many of the tribes. And What's left, though, are the few families of Benjamin who lived in Judah, and they were called up by Rehoboam. And so Rehoboam was going to use force to keep the north from seceding. In verse 22 to 24, it said, "But the word of the Lord came to Shemaiah, the man of God, and said, Say to Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, king of Judah, and all to the house of Judah and Benjamin, and to the rest of the people, Thus says the Lord, You shall not go up and fight against your relatives, the people of Israel. Every man return to his home, for this thing is not from me." So they listened to the word of the Lord, and they went home again according to the word of the Lord. Now, did Rehoboam cancel the war, or did the people cancel the war? Well, maybe they knew, or he knew, that they were not strong enough to defeat the northern tribes, the 10 tribes. Their hearts just weren't in it, and maybe Rehoboam understood that he wasn't a military man. Maybe Rehoboam actually listened to the Lord. That really may be true, because if you read 2 Chronicles 12:1, it says, "When the rule of Rehoboam was established and he was strong, he abandoned the law of the Lord and all Israel with him." If he abandoned it, meant that he was with the Lord. And some people feel like the first 5 years he did try to follow the Lord. In any case, they went home. And notice that this is a new prophet. We had Ahijah before, and here we have Shemaiah. Welcome back. Let's pause here for a moment and wonder what happened to the tribe of Simeon. They're in the midst of Judah. In Genesis 34:25 to 31, it says, Simeon and his brother Levi avenged their sister, and that was Dinah. She had been taken by Shechem, a Hivite, and she had been forced into marriage, so we say, with him. He saw her, he seized her, he lay with her, and he humiliated her, is what it says in the scripture. And the brothers wanted revenge. And so, but Hamor really wanted detente. He wanted to marry Dinah. And so the brothers said, okay, if all of you are circumcised, then you'll be acceptable. On the third day, as they were recovering, they were probably at their weakest state post-op, so to speak, Simeon and Levi killed all the males. In 30, it says, this is Jacob, you have brought trouble on me by making me a stink to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household. And they responded, should we treat our sister like a prostitute? Well, after prophesying over his firstborn, Reuben, when he was dying, Jacob turned to bless Simeon and Levi, his next two eldest sons, and he said in Genesis 49:7, Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Well, Levi was eventually blessed to be priests, and when they went into the promised land, they never owned land. They were allowed to live in certain cities. They were spread out throughout the whole nation, but they did not own land. Simeon was given a small amount of land within Judah, but not a very good land. They didn't grow as rapidly as Judah, and they too were scattered among the tribes of Israel, and they essentially lost their identity. Thus, in the south, there are only two tribes left, Judah and Benjamin. And of them, Benjamin was fractured. Well, what can we learn from this story? Well, first of all, the obvious thing is don't make God angry. We should obey. Rehoboam had inherited too many horses. Jeroboam had made alliances with Egypt. God gave Israel laws for kings, and these kings, Jeroboam and Rehoboam, ignored them, and at everyone's peril. Often it's the third generation that tears things down, what the previous two generations have spent a lifetime building up. It's hard to teach values to children. Values are usually learned from hard knocks. And when we make the lives of our children better, as we all want to do, in a way we're denying them the suffering that makes us strong. After all, luxury spoils. Well, Proverbs 15:1 says, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. And that's so true. And there wasn't a soft answer in these instances. The next one is don't have too many wives. God blesses monogamy. And Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Rehoboam had 18 wives. This violates God's intention for marriage and his laws for kings. So how many wives is too many? Well, somebody in the group said one. Uh, Marriage is really God-given, and it's not for pleasure. It's not for sex. That's not the priority. The priority is not children, and it's not companionship. Marriage was designed by God to make us holy, not happy, to make us holy. Our spouse becomes the mirror that's held up in front of us that helps us see our imperfections and helps us become holy. No one else knows us as well as our wives. And they are the ones who can tell us when we're off track. They can help us become more holy. I recommend a book called Sacred Marriage by Gary Thomas, where he expands on this idea. And finally, David was a kingdom man. What is a kingdom man? Well, Rehoboam certainly wasn't. Tony Evans is one of my favorite preachers, and he defines a kingdom man as his children honor him, his wife respects him, others admire him, while all the time God blesses him. How do you become a kingdom man? Well, read his book, Kingdom Man by Tony Evans. Neither Rehoboam nor Jeroboam were kingdom men. Are you a kingdom man or a kingdom woman?